My name is Trooper Daniel Vickers, badge number 2847, Michigan State Police, Gaylord Post. I've been patrolling the highways and back roads of northern Michigan for 17 years now. Everything from I-75 to the two-lane county roads that wind through the forests between Grayling and the Mackinac Bridge. Before that, I did 4 years with the Traverse City Police Department and 2 years as a corrections officer at Kinross Correctional Facility in the Upper Peninsula. I've worked accident scenes that would turn your stomach, pulled bodies from frozen lakes, talked down suicidal individuals on bridge overpasses, and arrested people capable of things I still can't believe humans can do to each other. I tell you this because I need you to understand that I'm not easily shaken. I don't jump at shadows. I don't believe in ghost stories or campfire tales or the kind of nonsense that tourists tell each other about the Michigan wilderness. Or at least, I didn't believe in any of that until January 19th, 2024. Before I tell you what happened on County Road 612, before I explain why I've requested a transfer to a desk position and why I can no longer drive past mile marker 47 without my hands shaking, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this, if you're one of the people who finds these stories from law enforcement officers, please subscribe and like this video. I know that sounds strange given what I'm about to tell you, but getting this story out matters more than my career at this point. And the more people who see it, the harder it will be for them to bury it like they've buried everything else. And I'm curious. I need to know. Are you watching from Michigan? Have you ever driven through the northern Lower Peninsula in winter? Through those stretches of forest where the trees press so close to the road that your headlights seem to get swallowed before they reach the tree line? Have you ever felt like the road was longer than it should be? Like you'd been driving for an hour, but only covered 10 miles? Drop a comment. Tell me I'm not the only one who's noticed. Northern Michigan is a different world from the cities downstate. People who've only seen Detroit or Grand Rapids or even Traverse City don't understand what it's like up here once you get north of the 45th parallel. The forests are old, older than the state itself, older than the logging operations that tried to clear them in the 1800s. White pine and red pine and paper birch that have been growing in these soils since the glaciers retreated. There are stretches of forest between towns where you can drive for 30 miles without seeing a house, without seeing another car, without seeing anything but trees and snow, and the occasional deer frozen in your headlights. The Pigeon River Country State Forest alone covers over 100,000 acres of unbroken wilderness. Crawford County, where I'm stationed, has more state forest land than private property. And in winter, when the snow piles up 4 or 5 feet deep and the temperatures drop to -20 before wind chill, those forests become something else entirely. They become places where sounds don't carry right, where distances lie to you, where the darkness between the trees feels solid enough to touch. The Ottawa and Ojibwe people who lived here for thousands of years before European contact knew this. They had names for places in these forests that didn't translate well into English, names that roughly meant where the spirits walk, or the hungry place, or land that swallows. The settlers who came later learned some of these names, but didn't understand what they meant. They built logging camps in places the tribes had avoided for generations. They cut roads through areas that had been left deliberately untouched. And some of those camps disappeared, not failed or abandoned, but disappeared. with the men who worked them never seen again. Most of that history got buried under a century of development and tourism marketing. Northern Michigan is pure Michigan now, according to the ads. It's camping and fishing and fall color tours. But those of us who work up here, who patrol these roads at 3 in the morning in January, when the wind chill is 40 below and the nearest backup is 45 minutes away, we know there's something else in these forests. Something the tourism board doesn't mention. January 19th, 2024, started like any other winter shift. I came on duty at 1800 hours, checked out my patrol vehicle, a 2022 Dodge Charger with the pursuit package and winter tires, topped off my coffee thermos, and headed out onto I-75 for the evening patrol. The weather forecast called for light snow, temperatures around 15 degrees, winds from the northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Cold, but manageable. Normal winter conditions for this part of Michigan. My patrol area that night covered the stretch of I-75 from Grayling North to Indian River, plus the network of county roads and state highways that branch off into the forest. It's a big territory, almost 900 square miles. And on a weeknight in January, I might be the only trooper on duty for the entire area. That's just how it is up here. Not enough officers, too much ground to cover, and most nights nothing happens anyway, except the occasional drunk driver or deer strike. I spent the first few hours of my shift running routine traffic on I-75, wrote a couple of speeding tickets, helped a family from Ohio who'd slid into a ditch near Vanderbilt, and stopped at the Gaylord Post around 2200 hours to file some paperwork and grab a fresh cup of coffee. Everything normal, everything routine. Then, at 2247 hours, I got the call that changed everything. Dispatch radioed that they'd received a 911 call from a cell phone, coordinates placing the caller somewhere on County Road 612, about 12 miles east of I-75. The caller was a woman, sounded distressed, said she and her husband had been driving to their cabin near Black Lake when something happened to their car. She couldn't explain what, just that the car had stopped working and now something was wrong with her husband. The call had dropped before she could provide more details, and dispatch hadn't been able to reach her when they called back. The phone just rang and rang. I acknowledged the call and headed east on M32 toward County Road 612. It's not an unusual type of call for this area. Cars break down all the time in the winter, and cell service is spotty enough that dropped calls are more common than completed ones. I figured I'd find a couple of stranded tourists with a dead battery or a frozen fuel line, give them a jump or call them a tow, and be back on I-75 within an hour. I figured wrong. County Road 612 is one of those roads that doesn't appear on most GPS systems. It's a narrow two-lane that runs east from M33 through about 15 miles of state forest before dead-ending at a small cluster of hunting cabins near Black Lake. In summer, it's used by hunters and fishermen and the occasional ATV rider. In winter, it's barely maintained. Plowed maybe once a week, if the county has the budget, and most locals avoid it unless they absolutely have to use it. The trees on either side grow so close to the pavement that their branches form a canopy overhead. And even in daylight, the road has a twilight quality, like the sun can't quite reach through the dense growth. At night, in winter, with snow on the ground and more falling from a clouded sky, County Road 612 feels like driving into a tunnel that has no end. I turned onto the road at 2303 hours and immediately noticed that my radio reception had degraded. That's not unusual out here. We have dead zones all over the county where the terrain or the forest blocks the signal. but it felt more severe than normal. Usually, I can still hear dispatch, even if they sound like they're underwater. This time, the radio produced nothing but static, a low hiss that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. I tried calling in my position and got no response. I checked my cell phone and saw one bar of signal, barely enough to make a call, probably not enough to maintain one. I noted my mileage and continued east, keeping my speed around 35 miles per hour because the road surface was snow-packed and I couldn't see more than about 100 feet in front of me. The first mile passed normally. The second mile passed normally. At mile 3, I noticed something strange about the trees. The snow that had been falling when I turned onto the road had stopped, but the sky was still overcast. No stars visible, no moon. The trees on either side of the road were covered in ice, thick ice that reflected my headlights back at me with an intensity that seemed wrong. Not just reflective, but luminescent, like the ice itself was producing light. I slowed down further and watched the tree line, trying to understand what I was seeing. The ice on the branches wasn't forming the way ice normally forms. It was growing in patterns, angular patterns, geometric shapes that looked almost deliberate. I told myself it was pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns in random formations. I told myself the ice was just catching my headlights at unusual angles. I told myself a lot of things in those first few minutes. None of them helped. At mile 4, my dashboard instruments began to malfunction. The speedometer dropped to 0, even though I was still moving. The fuel gauge swung from half full to empty and back again. The temperature display, which had been showing 14 degrees, began cycling through numbers that made no sense. Minus 47, plus 112, minus 3, plus 89. The numbers changed every few seconds, never settling, never stabilizing. I checked my watch, an analog watch, because I'd learned not to trust digital devices in this part of the county. The second hand was moving, but it was moving backward. I watched it sweep counterclockwise for a full minute before I made myself look back at the road. That's when I saw the car. It was a dark blue Honda CR-V, late model, sitting in the middle of the road with its hazard lights on. The lights were flashing, but they were flashing wrong, out of sync with each other. The left blinker and the right blinker operating on different rhythms that created a stuttering, disorienting effect. I pulled up behind the vehicle and activated my light bar, though something told me the people in that car, if there were still people in that car, weren't going to be reassured by flashing red and blue. I called in my position on the radio, habit more than expectation, and got nothing but that pulsing static. I checked my cell phone. No signal now. Not even a single bar. I was alone out here, 12 miles from the nearest paved highway, with no communication and a disabled vehicle in front of me that might or might not contain 2 stranded tourists. I took a breath. I checked my service weapon. I grabbed my flashlight, and I stepped out of my patrol car into the coldest air I've ever felt in my life. The weather report had said 15 degrees. The temperature on my dashboard had been showing impossible numbers. But what I felt when I opened that door was something beyond cold. It was absence. Not the presence of cold, but the absence of heat, the absence of energy, the absence of anything that might sustain life. My breath didn't fog in front of my face the way it should have at these temperatures. The air didn't feel like air. It felt like nothing, like vacuum, like the space between stars. I stood there for 3 or 4 seconds, trying to force my lungs to work, and then the cold passed. Not gradually, but instantly, like stepping through a doorway from one room to another. 1 second I was freezing. The next I was fine, and the air around me felt almost warm, maybe 40 degrees, the temperature of an early spring evening. Nothing about this made sense. I knew that. But I had a job to do. A possible stranded motorist situation, maybe a medical emergency if the husband was injured like the wife had suggested on the phone. I walked toward the Honda CR-V with my flashlight raised and my other hand resting on the grip of my service weapon. The driver's side door was open. Not all the way open, just cracked, maybe 6 inches, like someone had started to get out and then stopped. I shined my flashlight through the gap and saw the interior of the car. Standard Honda features, cloth seats in gray, a GPS unit mounted on the dashboard, empty coffee cups in the center console. The keys were in the ignition, and the dashboard lights were on, though dim, flickering in the same arrhythmic pattern as the hazard lights. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was not. There was a woman in the passenger seat. She was wearing a winter coat, red with a fur-lined hood, and she was sitting very still, facing forward, her hands folded in her lap. I called out to her, identified myself as Michigan State Police, asked if she was okay. She didn't respond. She didn't turn her head. She didn't move at all. I moved around to the passenger side of the vehicle and shined my flashlight through the window to get a better look at her face. What I saw made me take 3 steps backward before I could stop myself. Her eyes were open, wide open, and they were wrong. The irises, which should have been whatever color her natural eye color was, were white. Not clouded over like cataracts, not rolled back in her head, but white like paper, like fresh snow, like the absence of color entirely. She was breathing. I could see her chest rising and falling in a slow, regular rhythm, but her eyes didn't blink, didn't move, didn't track toward the flashlight beam that was shining directly into them. She was looking at something I couldn't see, something that wasn't in this car, something that wasn't on this road, and her lips were moving, very slightly, very slowly, forming words that I couldn't hear through the closed window. I pulled open the passenger door, and that's when the sound hit me. Not loud, but everywhere, filling the air around me like fog, like pressure, a humming. No, not humming. Singing. Voices singing in a language I didn't recognize. Dozens of voices harmonizing in patterns that hurt to hear, patterns that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my skull, in my chest, in my bones. The woman's lips were moving in sync with the singing, but the sounds weren't coming from her. They were coming from the forest, from everywhere, from nowhere. I reached into the car to check her pulse, and the moment my fingers touched her wrist, she turned her head and looked directly at me. "He went to find them," she said. Her voice was flat, effectless, like she was reading from a script. "He heard them calling and he went to find them. They've been calling for such a long time, since before the roads, since before the trees. They're so hungry, Trooper. They've been hungry for so long." I asked her who she was talking about. I asked her where her husband went. I asked her what happened to their car. She smiled, and it was the worst smile I've ever seen. Too wide, too many teeth. Like her face was stretching to accommodate an expression it wasn't designed to make. "The road remembers," she said. "The road remembers everyone who travels on it. Every footstep, every wheel, every heartbeat. It's been remembering for thousands of years. And sometimes, when it gets hungry enough, it starts calling people back, calling them into the trees, calling them into the dark. Your road, trooper, the road you drive every night. It's been watching you. It knows your name. It knows your heartbeat. And soon, very soon, it's going to call you too. The singing from the forest grew louder. The ice on the trees began to crack and shift, geometric patterns reforming into new shapes that seemed to pulse and breathe. The woman's white eyes never left my face. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, maybe 50 yards from the road, maybe 500 yards, I heard a man scream. Not a cry for help, not a shout of surprise, a scream of the kind that comes from someone who has seen something so wrong, so fundamentally incompatible with human understanding, that their mind breaks under the weight of it. A scream that went on and on and on, without pause for breath, without diminishing in intensity, like a recording stuck on loop. I should have called for backup. I should have secured the scene and waited for additional units. I should have done 100 things that my training said to do in a situation involving a potential psychiatric emergency and a possible missing person. Instead, I did the one thing I'd been trained never to do. I left my patrol car, left my radio, left the road, and walked into the forest toward the sound of that scream. The snow was deep, maybe 3 feet, but I moved through it like it wasn't there. My legs pushed forward without resistance, without the burning effort that should have accompanied wading through waist-deep powder. The trees closed around me, blocking out what little light remained from my patrol car's light bar, but I didn't need my flashlight anymore. The ice on the branches was glowing now, definitely glowing, producing a blue-white light that illuminated the forest in every direction. And the geometric patterns in the ice were moving, shifting, rearranging themselves into new configurations that seemed to follow me as I walked, pointing towards something deeper in the trees. The singing continued, louder now, and I could almost make out words in the voices, words in a language that wasn't any human language, words that meant things I couldn't understand but could somehow feel. Loss, hunger, time, waiting. Such patient, endless waiting. I walked for what felt like hours. My watch had stopped, the hands frozen at 11:47, so I couldn't know how long I'd actually been moving through those trees. The screaming had stopped at some point, faded into silence without my noticing when it ended. The forest around me had changed, becoming something other than what a northern Michigan forest should be. The trees were too tall, stretching up into a sky I couldn't see, their trunks too wide, their branches too regular, too organized, like they'd been planted in deliberate patterns rather than grown naturally. And between the trees, in the spaces where the glowing ice cast its strange shadows, I began to see things moving. Not animals, not people. Shapes. Shapes that were almost human, but stretched, elongated, their proportions wrong in ways that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. They moved through the forest parallel to my path, keeping pace with me, watching me with eyes that weren't eyes, faces that weren't faces. They didn't approach. They didn't threaten. They just watched. And I understood, somehow, without anyone telling me, that they were waiting. Waiting to see what I would do. Waiting to see if I would turn back. Waiting to see if I was the one they'd been calling. I found the husband in a clearing, about 200 yards from the road. At least, I found what was left of him. He was standing in the center of the clearing, upright, facing me, but he wasn't standing under his own power. Something was holding him up. Something I couldn't see clearly, even with the ice light illuminating everything around me. His body was wrong. His arms were raised over his head, bent at angles that human arms don't bend. Fingers splayed out like he was reaching for something above him. His legs were together, feet pointed down, toes barely touching the snow. His head was tilted back, face toward the sky, and his mouth was open, stretched open, far wider than a human mouth should open, like his jaw had dislocated or like the bones had simply dissolved. And from his mouth, from that impossible opening, the singing was coming. All of it. Every voice I'd heard in the forest was coming from this one man's throat. I don't know how long I stood there watching him. Time had stopped making sense. The ice light pulsed. The shapes in the trees moved closer, circling the clearing. Their knot faces turned toward me. The man's head rotated slowly, impossibly slowly, until his eyes met mine. His eyes were like his wife's, white, pure white, empty of everything human but full of something else, something ancient, something hungry. "You came," he said, but it wasn't his voice. It was 1,000 voices speaking in unison, some male, some female, some human, some decidedly not. "We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for someone like you for such a long time. The watchers, the ones who walk the roads at night. You see us. You've always seen us, even when you told yourself you didn't. Every shadow that moved wrong, every stretch of road that felt too long, every face in the tree line that disappeared when you looked directly at it. You knew. You've always known. I tried to speak, tried to ask what they were, what they wanted, but my throat wouldn't work. My voice had frozen somewhere deep in my chest. The shapes in the trees moved closer still, and I could see them more clearly now. They had been people once. I could tell by the fragments of clothing that still clung to their elongated forms. Plaid shirts and jeans and work boots from 100 different decades, winter coats and fur hats, wool uniforms from an era before my grandparents were born. Loggers, settlers, travelers, all the people who had disappeared on this road, in these forests, over centuries of hungry waiting. "We don't want to hurt you," the voices said through the husband's broken mouth. "We want to help you. We want to show you what we've seen. Time isn't what you think it is. Space isn't what you think it is. Reality is a membrane, trooper, and this place is where the membrane is thin." The Anishinaabe knew. They marked the boundaries. They made agreements. They kept the hungry places fed, so the hungry places wouldn't spread. But the loggers came. The settlers came. The roads came. And the agreements were broken. The offerings stopped. So the hungry places learned to feed themselves. They learned to call. They learned to wait. They learned to take what they needed. I found my voice then, though it came out as barely a whisper. I asked what they needed. What could possibly satisfy a hunger that had been building for centuries? The husband's body tilted forward, his feet leaving the ground entirely now, suspended in air by something I couldn't see, floating toward me with his arms still raised and his mouth still open and his white eyes locked on mine. "Witnesses," the voices said, "not victims. Witnesses. Someone who sees what we are and goes back. Someone who tells the story. Someone who reminds the world that there are places where the old rules still apply. We take the careless, trooper. We take the lost. We take the ones who wander from the road without respect, without understanding. But we need the witnesses too. We need someone to carry our story into the world of light and movement and linear time. Will you be our witness? Will you remember what you've seen here and tell others? Will you walk this road every night knowing what waits in the trees? Knowing that we're always watching, always hungry, always calling. Will you serve as the boundary keeper, the one who stands between our world and yours? I should have said no. I should have turned and run back to my patrol car and driven as fast as possible back to the highway and never spoken about any of this to anyone. That's what a rational person would do. That's what a sane person would do. But standing in that clearing, surrounded by the stretched and altered forms of the hungry place's centuries of victims, looking into the white eyes of a man whose body had become an instrument for something beyond human understanding, I understood that rationality wasn't an option anymore. Sanity wasn't an option. The only options were to witness or to be witnessed, to serve or to be served upon. Yes, I said. Just that one word. Just that one syllable. But it was enough. The husband's body collapsed. One moment he was floating, singing, speaking with 1,000 voices. And the next he was just a man lying in the snow, unconscious but breathing, his jaw relocated, his arms at normal angles, his eyes, when I checked them, brown and human and ordinary. The shapes in the trees retreated, fading back into the darkness between the ice-covered branches. The singing stopped. The geometric patterns in the ice dissolved into random natural formations. And I was standing alone in a clearing in the Pigeon River Country State Forest, about 200 yards from County Road 612, in the coldest night of the year, with no memory of how I was going to explain any of this to my supervisors. I carried the husband back to the road. He weighed what a man should weigh. The snow was deep and difficult to walk through now, resisting every step. My muscles burned. My lungs ached. Reality had reasserted itself, and I was just a middle-aged trooper in inadequate winter gear, hauling a 180-pound unconscious man through 3 feet of powder. When I reached the road, the wife was still in the passenger seat of the Honda, but her eyes were normal now, dark brown, and she was crying. She didn't seem to remember anything after their car stopped working. She didn't remember the singing. She didn't remember the white eyes. She didn't remember telling me that the road knew my name. I loaded her husband into the back of my patrol car, called for an ambulance once my radio started working again, about a mile west of the clearing, and drove them both to the hospital in Gaylord. The official report states that I found them suffering from hypothermia after their vehicle became disabled. The husband was treated for mild frostbite and confusion. The wife was treated for shock. They were released 3 days later and drove back to their home in Grand Rapids. I never spoke to either of them again. I never told them what I saw in that clearing. I never told anyone at the Michigan State Police what I saw in that clearing. Not in my official report. Not in the mandatory debrief. Not in the sessions with the department psychologist that I was required to attend after exhibiting what my supervisor called signs of unusual stress. But I've been back to County Road 612. I've been back more times than I can count. Every shift, every night, I find myself driving east from M33, turning onto that narrow tree-lined road, following it into the darkness where the radio doesn't work and the GPS shows impossible locations. I don't go all the way to the clearing anymore. I don't need to. They know I'm there. They know I'm watching. And sometimes, when the ice forms on the branches in those geometric patterns, when the temperature drops in ways that defy the weather reports, when the singing starts somewhere. Deep in the forest, I pull over. I step out of my patrol car, and I listen. I witness. I remember. I did some research after that night. I had to understand what I'd agreed to, what I'd become. I went to the Traverse City Library and pulled everything I could find on the history of Crawford County, the Pigeon River Forest, the lands around Black Lake. I found logging records from the 1870s and 1880s that documented unusual disappearances from camps in what is now the state forest. Men who went into the woods to fell trees and never came back. Men who were found days or weeks later, wandering on roads miles from where they'd disappeared, unable to explain where they'd been, unable to remember anything except a feeling of being watched, of being tested, of being asked a question they couldn't quite hear. I found newspaper clippings from the early 1900s about a series of incidents on a county road that no longer exists, a road that ran roughly parallel to what is now County Road 612, a road that was abandoned and allowed to be reclaimed by the forest after too many travelers reported seeing things in the trees that they couldn't explain. I found letters from a Catholic priest who served the mission church in Burt Lake in the 1920s. Letters to his bishop describing encounters with something he called the old hunger, something the Ottawa people had warned him about, something that lived in the spaces between the trees and fed on those who didn't show proper respect. I found other things too. Tribal records, oral histories, accounts from Anishinaabe elders recorded by anthropologists in the 1950s and 1960s. They talked about agreements that had been made long ago, agreements between the people who lived in this region and the spirits that inhabited certain places, the hungry places, the watching places, the places where reality was thin and things could pass through from one side to the other. These agreements required offerings, not human sacrifice, nothing like that, but acknowledgement, recognition, respect. The offerings were prayers, songs, tobacco, small gifts left at boundary markers that told the spirits that humans knew they were there, that humans understood the rules, that humans would not trespass without permission. When the Europeans came, when the logging companies came, when the railroads and the roads and the tourists came, the agreements were forgotten. The offerings stopped. The boundary markers were torn down or paved over or simply ignored. And the hungry places, the watching places, began to take what they needed directly. I spoke to an elder from the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians about 6 weeks after my encounter on County Road 612. He was 87 years old, a retired teacher who had spent his life collecting and preserving the traditional knowledge of his people. He listened to my story without interrupting, without showing surprise, without any indication that what I was telling him was unusual or unexpected. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You're not the first," he said. "There have always been watchers. People who stand at the boundaries and remind both sides that the other exists. My grandfather was one. His grandmother before him. Going back generations. The spirits need us as much as we need them. They need to be seen. They need to be remembered. They need someone to carry their stories into the world of daylight so that even the people who never see them, who never enter the hungry places, know that something is out there. Know that there are rules. Know that there are consequences for breaking them. You made an agreement that night, trooper. You became a boundary keeper. It's not a job you can quit. It's not a role you can transfer to someone else. It's who you are now. It's what you are. For the rest of your life, you'll feel the pull of those places. You'll know when the boundaries are thin. You'll know when something's trying to cross over. And you'll have to decide, every time, whether to let it through or to push it back. I asked him what happens if I fail. What happens if I'm not there when the boundary gets thin? What happens if I can't push back whatever tries to come through? He looked at me with eyes that had seen more than I could imagine, eyes that carried the weight of centuries of knowledge that his people had fought to preserve. Then the hungry places spread, he said. A little more of your world becomes a little less solid. A little more of the space between trees becomes a place where things can hide. A little more of your roads become roads that remember, roads that call, roads that take. It's been happening slowly for 150 years, ever since the agreements started breaking down. The boundaries are thinner now than they've ever been. The hungry places are bigger. The watchers, the ones who see, the ones who remember, they're the only thing holding the line. You're not alone, trooper. There are others like you. Rangers in the national parks, officers on the highways, people who have seen what you've seen and made the same choice you made. You'll recognize them when you meet them. They'll recognize you. And together, you'll do what humans have always done in this land. You'll keep the balance. You'll maintain the boundaries. You'll remember the old rules, even when everyone else has forgotten. I've been a boundary keeper for 11 months now. Every night I patrol the roads of northern Michigan. Every night I watch the tree lines for geometric patterns in the ice. Every night I listen for singing in frequencies that shouldn't carry through winter air. I've seen them 3 more times since that first night. The shapes in the trees, the stretched and altered forms of the ones who were taken. They don't approach me. They don't threaten me. They watch. They wait. They remind me that the agreement is still in effect, that I am their witness, that I carry their story into the world of light and movement and linear time. I've met 2 other boundary keepers since then. One is a park ranger in the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore in the Upper Peninsula. She's been keeping watch over a hungry place on the Lake Superior shore for almost 20 years. She was the one who told me about the marks. About a month after my encounter, I noticed a discoloration on my chest, just over my heart. A pattern in my skin that looks almost like a handprint, but the fingers are too long. The palm is too wide. The shape is too geometric to be human. It doesn't hurt. It's not raised or inflamed. It's just there, a mark that wasn't there before, a sign of the agreement I made in that clearing. The ranger has one too. So does a highway patrol officer from Wisconsin that I met at a conference last spring. We don't talk about it openly. We don't share our stories with people who haven't seen what we've seen. But we know each other. We recognize the look in each other's eyes, the weight of witnessing, the burden of memory. I requested a transfer to a desk position not because I can't do this job anymore, but because I needed time to understand what I'd become. The transfer was denied. My supervisor said I was too valuable in the field, that my experience was needed on the roads, that northern Michigan couldn't afford to lose another veteran trooper to administrative duties. I think she knows something. I think all of them know something. The supervisors, the administrators, the people who control the assignments and the territories. I think they put certain officers in certain places for reasons they never explain. I think there's a system, an unofficial system, that identifies the people who can see, the people who can witness, and make sure they're stationed where they're needed most. I don't have proof of this. I probably never will. But I've noticed patterns. Officers who request transfers out of the northern posts are almost always denied or reassigned to equally remote territories. Officers who report unusual incidents on their patrol routes are never disciplined or questioned or sent for psychological evaluation. The reports are filed and forgotten, buried in archives that no one ever reviews. Someone is keeping track. Someone is making sure the boundaries are watched. I'm recording this because I made a promise in that clearing. I promised to be a witness. I promised to carry the story into the world of light and movement and linear time. This is me keeping that promise. This is me telling you, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from, that there are places in northern Michigan where the old rules still apply. Places where the forest remembers everyone who passes through it. Places where the ice forms in patterns that aren't natural, and the singing comes from everywhere and nowhere. Places where the hungry things wait and watch and call. If you drive through these forests, especially at night, especially in winter, respect the boundaries. Stay on the roads. Don't wander into the trees because you think you heard something or saw something or felt something calling to you. The hungry places are real. The agreements are real. The consequences are real. And if you ever find yourself on County Road 612, east of M33, driving through that tunnel of trees where your radio stops working and your GPS shows impossible coordinates and the ice on the branches begins to glow, turn around. Go back. Don't stop to investigate. Don't convince yourself that you imagined it. The road knows your name. The road knows your heartbeat. And the things in the trees are always listening, always hungry, always waiting for someone who doesn't know the rules, who doesn't respect the boundaries, who doesn't understand that some debts can never be fully paid. I'll be out there tonight. I'll be out there every night until I can't drive anymore, until my body gives out, or my mind gives in, or the hungry places finally decide they need me for something more than witnessing. I'll be watching the tree lines. I'll be listening for the singing. I'll be maintaining the boundaries that separate your world from theirs. That's my job now. That's my purpose. That's the price I pay for seeing what I've seen, for knowing what I know, for making the agreement I made in that frozen clearing 11 months ago. The forest remembers everything. The road remembers everyone. And now, so do I. My name is Trooper Daniel Vickers, badge number 2847, Michigan State Police, boundary keeper, witness to the hungry places. Welcome to northern Michigan. The trees are watching. The ice is listening. And somewhere in the dark, between mile markers, something ancient is singing your name.